They yelled at us and they called us by our character names, and like the guys were really scary, and it was exhausting physically, and to this day it's the hardest thing I've ever done. School Ties. I was playing like this anti-Semitic bully, and it seemed like those were the roles I was kind of getting cast as, was like bad guys all the time.
It's so hard to find decent help these days.
Can't you move any faster, please?
If you care to step outside, I'll show you how fast I can.
David, come on! David, come on! David!
Obviously, I knew Matt, and that was fun, and I got to know, you know, Anthony Rapp and Chris O'Donnell and Randall Battenkoff and Brendan Fraser and those guys really well, and it was definitely like a sort of thrilling moment because it was the first real movie. Like I knew it was actually going to come out, you know, that I was going to be in. It was a little frustrating to have such a small role and for it to be so relentlessly unpleasant, but take what you can get, I guess. Dazed and Confused.
And you, get the hell off my property.
Oh, well, I'm sorry, ma'am. I was just escorting your fine young son home from school. There were some ruffians about, and I... Oh, and Mitch, Carl, we'll be seeing each other again.
What were you channeling for the O'Bannon character? I remember reading at one time that you wrote "fuck you" on the paddle yourself.
I don't know if that was me or if that was Rick's idea. I can't remember, but Rick encouraged everyone to like write their own stuff, to, you know, try their own scenes, like, which is kind of amazing to me that he gave us all that much freedom. It was a little bit disappointing to be like the only unlikable character in a movie full of incredibly likable people, but it was kind of a lot like what it looked like, you know, sort of like a bunch of young people having fun, mostly working nights, sort of running around. Feel like we were sort of making it up as we went along, and as I look back, I'm amazed that Rick was so comfortable with that, given like how much you need to schedule movies and plan them out and know where you're gonna shoot. But he was really fluid, and he created a great creative environment, and it was definitely the movie where I got the sense that like, this is something, you know, it's kind of was demystified. Like I could do this, you know what I mean? And maybe we could make our own movie. And he was very inspiring in that regard. Chasing Amy.
Alyssa, there isn't another soul on this f***ing planet who has ever made me half the person I am when I'm with you. And I would risk this friendship for the chance to take it to the next plateau, because it is there between you and me. You can't deny that.
That was the first time that I was like, got to play a full sort of developed leading role, and also got to play kind of a range of emotions and express myself emotionally, and had this speech about being in love with her. And it was really an interesting experience because we had so little time that we had to kind of rehearse like a play. So we rehearsed the whole thing all the way through a bunch of times. So we just knew the thing back to front. And when we shot, it went by really fast, you know what I mean? And we shot on 16, and I don't even remember, 20 days or something like that. And I guess I kind of thought maybe there would be that much rehearsal on most movies. You know, I didn't realize that was a totally unique experience. I slept on Kevin's couch. We all sort of bunked together, and, you know, we all wore our own clothes, and it was definitely that sort of indie era feel, you know, and he had made Clerks, so he was already kind of famous in the indie world, you know, and Rick had already made Slacker when I worked with him. So both those guys I kind of looked up to and admired as sort of DIY filmmaker models.
What did you say? You're chasing Amy.
What do you look so shocked for, man? Fat bastard does this all the time. He thinks just because he don't say anything, it'll have some huge impact when he does open his fucking mouth?
Jesus Christ, why don't you shut up?
Kevin was a big inspiration to me, both like because he was able to do all this stuff, and he also was very specific about his writing. He was very text-oriented. You know, it was not like, he was the opposite of Rick in the sense of like there was no improv, no changing anything. He wanted the writing to be exactly as he kind of laid it out. And not only that, but in some cases he had like the inflection in mind that he wanted you to use. And I didn't know any better. I didn't know that you weren't supposed to give actors line readings. So I was just like, okay, I'll say it like that. We ended up just becoming friends. And I think ended up doing like 6 movies with him or something like that. And you know, he's my friend today, and I really love him. And he really wore his heart on his sleeve, you know what I mean? He was a caring and thoughtful and empathetic. And it was really like made a big impression on me that this was a guy who was making films when I thought you had to be much older and much more experienced and much more, I don't know what, have more gray hair or something. I thought, well, if Kevin can do it again, like that was right around the time when we were working on trying to get Good Will Hunting made, and he was a big inspiration, and he helped us with that, and so that was a big part of that. Good Will Hunting. Most of the writing for Good Will Hunting was done improv style. We knew we wanted to do the sort of Reservoir Dogs, Slacker, Clerks version of a movie, and the way you did that was to do it inexpensively. And so we deliberately wrote a movie that was mostly people talking in rooms, and we wrote a part for, what we knew would be the person that would get the movie financed, because we knew that wasn't us. And so we tried to write some monologues that would appeal to somebody famous. We didn't even know anybody famous at the time, so it was all sort of guesswork. And mostly it was done because we had nothing else to do. We lived together, we were going to auditions, and a lot of days would go by when we just were hanging out. So we would talk about it, and it evolved quite a bit and changed quite a bit, but some of it is like still those early improvs that we did, and we would tape record and then go over the tape and pick out the good parts.
So when are you done with those meetings? Like the week after I'm 21. Yeah, they gonna hook you up with a job or what? Yeah, fucking sit in a room and do long division for the next 50 years. Yeah, probably make some nice bank though.
It was odd that we even thought that we could do this. You know what I mean? That it was something that was possible or that would ever happen. I think we were young enough to be just sort of inexperienced enough to just sort of think maybe it'll work, instead of realizing how stacked against us the odds were. It was definitely like, some of those early indie movie experiences that made me feel like maybe with the right luck, this could happen. And it did, mostly due to our agent, Patrick Weitzel, who kind of made people believe in it and got people the script. And that was the biggest hurdle that movie had to get over, was kind of, to get in the hands of somebody who actually could make a movie. And he was a young agent at the time, he's still our agent, and kind of made his bones on selling Good Will Hunting. I guess we all sort of did. Gus definitely lent a maturity to the movie. It was a little bit adolescent, a little bit naive, in its original sort of form. And because Gus was much older than us and much more mature and more sophisticated and kind of had a better sense of when we were pushing too far, for sentiment or reaching for something, he definitely made the movie real.
You don't know about real loss, because it only occurs when you love something more than you love yourself. I doubt you've ever dared to love anybody that much.
Robin was just like the biggest star in the world. We just couldn't believe that we were working with Robin Williams. It was like the fact that he was doing it, the fact that we would get to hang out with him and like ride in the van with him and listen to him like tell jokes. We went up and watched him do stand-up once. It was like, the beginning of a very sort of dreamlike fantasy sequence or something, where I was doing all these things were happening in my life that I thought I wanted to do, but never actually really believed would quite come true, and yet there we were with Robin Williams. And I think, he was just coming off like this great run of movies, Awakenings and Good Morning Vietnam. And he was like such a big star. And I hadn't even been around somebody who was famous before. And we would walk down the street and like, people in Boston would be like, Mork for Mork! And I was like, wow, all those movies, and that's what you remember, Mork for Mork, huh? It was a fantasy. I mean, he only worked for 3 weeks. And it was like, I remember every single day, every bit of dailies, every bit of dialogue. It was literally a dream come true. Armageddon. Doing Armageddon was so alien to me. You know what I mean? It was like, I had done Chasing Amy so recently, and we did that for $250,000. And I remember thinking like, we could make 400 Chasing Amy's for what we're making this movie for.
Those 14 brave souls traveling into the heavens.
That man's not a salesman. That's your daddy.
It was a really cool experience because it was with all these actors I really respected, like Billy Bob Thornton and Steve Buscemi and Owen Wilson, and there were all these cool people that were doing it. And Liv, who was so great, and Bruce was such a like iconic figure and such a nice guy, and he was so generous and kind and fun, and he was kind of the leader of the gang, and Michael had a totally different attitude about filmmaking from anyone I'd ever met before. It was so visual, and he obviously has a very distinctive, iconic kind of style that is like a Michael Bay movie that you can recognize. I learned a ton about what filmmaking was like on a big scale, and it was 120 days or something, and I had just never seen anything that massive. Plus we had cooperation from NASA, and there we were on the space shuttle. It was an incredible experience. I really learned a lot about the sort of professionalism, and from the crew was really excellent. They were really talented. It was a lot of fun. I wasn't expecting that we were making an art movie. I mean, I knew enough to know this isn't really an Oscar type movie. This is a fun movie where for some reason it's easier to send to teach oil drillers to be astronauts than it would be to teach astronauts to drill a hole in the ground. I have some great memories from that movie. It was a lot of fun. Pearl Harbor. The prep for the movie was some of the most intensely interesting and powerful stuff I ever did.
After 2 years of training, you believe that a $45,000 airplane is there for your amusement?
I was doing it to try to inspire the men, sir, in the way that you've inspired me. I believe the French even have a word for that, when the men get together to honor their leaders. They call it an homage, sir.
A what?
An homage, sir.
That's bullshit, Macaulay!
I took flying lessons, so I basically learned how to fly, and that was really interesting and fun. And, flying a little Marchetti aerobatic airplane out of Santa Monica Airport. And I had been kind of afraid to fly up to that point, and it really helped my fear of flying to realize the sort of physics behind flight and how it worked.
Bombers dead ahead. Let's drop in on them and give them a reception.
I don't know how they got permission to do this, but they put us in a boot camp in the actual U.S. Army. So we did this, I think it was Fort Lightning was the name of it, and it was this pre-Ranger training course that basically you did before you went to Ranger school to sort of prepare you for the rigors of that. And they somehow got us all in it. And it was horrible. It was incredibly agonizing, painful, miserable experience, and I would have definitely quit the first day if I just wouldn't have been just too embarrassed to have it get out that I quit the training. And they yelled at us and they called us by our character names, and the guys were really scary, and it was exhausting physically, and to this day, it's the hardest thing I've ever done. It was really personally satisfying to get through it, and to after it was over, have the drill sergeants treat me like a normal human being and to sleep in a nice bed. I just appreciated everything so much more. It's hard to think about that movie without thinking about how slammed we got for it, you know what I mean? Because I really thought we were gonna do something kind of different, and it ended up sort of being Armageddon in World War II. But it wasn't as bad as it was made out to be. And it also wasn't a bomb. People always say, oh, Pearl Harbor bombed. We had $500 million. Turns out that's the way it goes. Sometimes you win, sometimes you lose, sometimes you kind of win, but they say you lost. The town.
Let's fast forward to 2010, The Town. This was coming off of Gone Baby Gone, which was the first movie that you directed. But this is your first time, I believe, directing yourself. What was that experience like? I
wasn't confident enough to direct myself with the first movie, and I really wanted to focus on directing, and I really wanted people to see how talented my brother was. So there was definitely an added level of pressure with The Town in the sense that I was going to be in it as well. And I was really self-conscious about how many takes I did on myself. And one of the pieces of advice I got early on from an actor-director was make sure you get enough coverage on yourself. Because the tendency is to sort of do a bunch of takes with you, do a bunch of takes with you, do a bunch of takes with you, and then just do one quick take on yourself and be okay, we can move on. And you just end up sort of screwing yourself. So I remember purposely saying ahead of time, I'm gonna do extra takes on myself. Don't think it's because someone told me to do it. It's not because I'm narcissistic. And being on set, I was used to being on camera, actually. That wasn't the stressful part. The stressful part was the directing and the directing of other actors and the directing of action and the car chase, and that was the stuff that I really had no experience with. Oftentimes felt like I was, doing on the fly and making up as we went along, and that was what I was really scared wasn't going to work. That I would be revealed as a bad director because, the car chase wasn't tense enough, or the shootouts weren't realistic feeling, or whatever.
Here we go.
heat loomed large over that movie. You know, it was such an iconic movie about bank robbery, and you know, it had such great acting in it, and it felt like I definitely did, you know, tip the hat to the movie because we have a clip of the movie in the movie. But I definitely remember being intimidated by the fact that he had been so good, and thinking that we would be compared to that, and being really nervous about the technical aspects of that movie. The truth is that movie was really made in the research of it.
Marty McGuire, Cummins Armored Courier, 5'10", 220, 52 years old. Picks up every Wednesday and Friday at exactly 8:12, makes $110 a day, carries a Sig 9.
I spent a lot of time with guys at the FBI. I went to a bunch of prisons and talked to a bunch of guys who had robbed armed trucks and got a lot of really interesting stories from that. Spent a lot of time in Charlestown. Really, it was more of Charlestown of the late 80s than it reflected the reality of Charlestown at that time. But there was a time when it was really, you know, the sort of bank robbery capital of the world. Argo. Argo was written by a guy named Chris Terrio, produced by Smokehouse, and made at Warner Brothers, and it got submitted to me, you know, as like, because I had done The Town with Warner Brothers, and they said, you know, mid-level sort of drama seemed to be where I kind of fit in, and you know, they had this script, and as soon as I read it, I just thought, like, I have to make this movie.
Mary, who are the last 3 prime ministers of Canada?
Trudeau, Pearson, and Diefenbaker.
What's your father's name?
Howard.
What's his occupation?
Fisherman.
Where were you born?
Halifax, Nova Scotia.
What's your date of birth?
February 21st, 1952.
Good. What's your job on the movie?
Producer.
Associate producer. What was the last movie you produced?
High and Dry.
Who paid for that?
CFTC.
What's your middle name? What's your middle name? What's your middle name?
Leon?
Shoot him. He's an American spy.
It touched on all these different parts of my life that I was interested in. You know, obviously there's the Hollywood aspect, but also the Middle Eastern studies, you know, major aspect of my life. And it was a part of the world that I thought was really fascinating. And it was an event that I knew a little bit about, but didn't really know as much about. And I had done some research with the CIA around Sum of All Fears. And so I knew that it was a much more sort of bureaucratic place than it was like a sexed up headpiece and rifle, you know, like assassin's den. And I thought that was really interesting. And I just thought Chris's script was so smart and so unique. And it had such great characters, you know, and I thought, like, this is something where I could use a lot of the actors who I know out there who are really good, who aren't necessarily stars, but who are just fabulous actors. I mean, it just seemed obvious to me that it was a really brilliantly written movie, and I could only screw it up, you know what I mean? And all I had to do, I remember thinking, was just like deliver on each day, each moment, like really approach it sort of on a one day at a time basis, because, you know, otherwise it was a little scary. You know, it was like these two competing tones. You had a comedy, you had a thriller, you had Hollywood, and you had the Middle East, things that didn't necessarily seem to go together. So I was nervous that it wouldn't sort of all gel and work. And I just definitely approached it as, just get this scene right, just get that moment right. That was just a movie where I just got lucky every step of the way. Lucky to get the script, got the best actors, ended up getting the locations we wanted to use. We shot at the CIA, we shot at the State Department. We had amazing technical people working on it, and an incredible cast and crew. And it was just like, I know that I was the beneficiary of a lot of talented people and a lot of good luck. Batman vs. Superman, Justice League. I don't think I even realized how iconic the character was until I took the job, and like that was a big story. And it happened at the time when the internet was expanding into the movie business in a kind of a different way, you know what I mean? And like the fan sites and the relationship with the fans and the studios and the comic book creators and stuff was changing and evolving. Zach told me he wanted to basically do the tone of the Dark Knight, you know, Frank Miller series, where he's older and he's kind of broken down and more vulnerable. And I thought that was a really interesting approach to Batman. The spirit of that, as a guy who's vulnerable, as a guy who's aches when he gets up in the morning, as a guy who like feels a lot of psychological sort of torment, I thought was a really interesting approach to playing a hero. And that was how, you know, what we wanted to do. And, you know, I had a better time on Batman vs. Superman, which I really enjoyed doing. And Justice League was unfortunately touched by, some personal tragedy and of death in Zach's family. And it just, like I say, sometimes things sort of work and gel, and sometimes they just, you seem to be just having one problem after another, I really loved Batman vs. Superman, and Chris wrote on it, and I really love Zach, and I loved putting on the costume, and the idea of doing the digital alteration to the voice was really interesting to me, and I had a good time. I loved Detroit. It was a really fun city, a really cool place. My kids came out and visited me and saw me in the bat suit, and they let me borrow the suit for my son's birthday, and so that was a lot of fun. And I sort of had my fill of that. They said, do you want to direct and star in like a solo Batman movie? I found that I had kind of at just some point lost my enthusiasm or passion for it. I was like, this should really be made by somebody for whom it's their wildest dream, come true. And for me, it had become like something different, and it was clear to me that it was time to move on. But I do have some really fond memories, particularly of Batman vs. Superman, and how exciting that was, and how energizing it was, and how much fun we had. The Way Back. The Way Back was a really interesting movie for me because some of it was I could really identify with. It was like, I'm a recovering alcoholic, this guy's an alcoholic, and I understood a little bit of that, and I kind of could understand what he was going through, and so it was like interesting to have such an intimate relationship on some level with an emotional issue the character had, and also, the main source of pain, obviously, in his life was the death of his son, which I couldn't even imagine what that would be like. So it was kind of, on the one hand, something I was really comfortable with, and on the other hand, I had to totally sort of use my imagination for what it would be like to feel that much pain and to suffer that much and to kind of carry that much resentment, against sort of the world. And also, I'd never been a coach before, so I had to develop this relationship with the guys playing the players, who are amazing, fantastic guys. And that one just turned out to be a little bit like Argo. Like, I just felt like everything was sort of working well, and the cast was great. And, we got lucky with a bunch of stuff, and I felt really emotionally connected and in tune with, where I needed to be character-wise. It was really just fun every day. I know that's a weird thing to say about a movie that's got a lot of dark emotion in it, but ultimately it was an inspirational movie, and it's a kind of a movie about overcoming adversity, and had a message of hope that really resonated with me and really still does now. And it's probably the performance I'm the most proud of.